The candles in the long supper room at Renfield Hall had burned down to their second hour when the Duke of Aldermere bent to my ear and said, in a voice meant only for me, "Run with me tonight." I had been lifting my glass of barley water because wine would have undone me before the toasts, and the glass stopped at my lip. The room did not stop. The 40 guests at the rehearsal supper went on laughing at something my future husband had said, and the footmen went on circling with platters of pheasant, and the small string quartet went on with a Boccherini minuet that had no business being so cheerful. But the world inside my ear stopped. "Your Grace," I said, without turning my head, "you forget yourself." "I forget nothing," the Duke said. His breath was warm against the loose curl behind my ear, and his gloved hand rested for one improper second on the back of my chair. "I am sober, I am sane, and I am telling you that if you marry Mr. Vance at 9 tomorrow morning, I will spend the rest of my life knowing I let it happen. I would rather you call me presumptuous tonight than mourn a kind girl by dawn. Listen to me." I did not look at him. If I looked at him, I would lose the color in my face and the steadiness in my hands, and every aunt at this table would notice, and there would be no marriage by morning whether I wished it or not. I kept my eyes on the silver salt cellar shaped like a swan, and I said very softly, "What have you learned?" "I will tell you in the portrait gallery in 10 minutes. The eastern door, behind the dowager's chair. Make some pretext." "Your Grace." "Adelaide." It was the first time he had ever used my name without the miss, and I felt it the way one feels a thumb pressed against the inside of a wrist, where the pulse lives. "I would never ask this of you for any reason but the truth. 10 minutes. Then he was straightening, lifting his own glass, smiling at my father across the table with the easy ducal courtesy he had practiced since he was 15, and saying something about how the lamb had been very fine. My father, who had taken a little more port than was prudent, answered too loudly that the cook had been with us since I was in short skirts, and the lamb was the least of her gifts. My future husband, Mr. Edmund Vance, laughed obligingly. The Duke's eyes did not leave my father's face, but under the table, his boot, very lightly, just once, touched the side of my sliver. 10 minutes. I lifted my glass. I drank the barley water. I tasted nothing. The candle nearest my plate guttered and threw a thin smoke curl across the silver. The wax smelled of beeswax and a sharp green hint of bay. My hand, where the gloved fingers rested on the linen, was cold. The skin at the back of my neck, where his breath had been, was warm. You must understand the shape of my situation, because otherwise, the next 10 minutes I am about to describe will sound like the recklessness of a girl in want of attention, and I have spent the better part of my 26 years giving no one cause to call me reckless. I was Adelaide Marjorie Thorne, only surviving child of Sir Rowland Thorne of Renfield, and on the morning that would come, in 8 3/4 hours, I was to be married to Mr. Edmund Vance, a barrister of London with chambers in the Temple, a small estate in Sussex he had purchased 2 years ago, and an income my father's solicitor had called perfectly sound for a country gentleman of comfortable habits. I had not loved him. I had not pretended to love him. I had agreed to the wedding because my father, 6 months prior, had shown me a ledger of debts I had not known he carried. The debts were not vulgar. He had not gamed them away or chased an opera dancer. He had stood security for his elder brother's shipping concern in the year I was born, and the concern had foundered in the Baltic ice, and a paper signed in good faith in 1796 had been growing, patient and quiet, in the books of a banking house in Threadneedle Street for 3 decades. The bank had grown tired of patience. The note was called. My father, who had given me a horse on my 16th birthday and a pianoforte on my 18th, and a season in London on my 20th, sat in his library, with his hands flat on the Morocco leather of his desk, and told me he had been a fool, and that the only way Renfield would pass to my future sons, instead of to the hammer of an auctioneer, was if I would consent to receive the addresses of Mr. Edmund Vance, who had let it be known, through a mutual acquaintance, that he wished to marry into an old name and had the means to settle an old debt. I had said yes. I had said yes calmly, and I had said yes the same day, and I had thanked my father for asking instead of arranging. We had eaten cold mutton together that night because the cook had her half-day, and neither of us could swallow much. That had been 6 months ago. Mr. Vance had come down to Renfield once a fortnight since then. He was 31, dark, neatly made, and possessed of a courtroom manner he never quite put off in a drawing-room. He had brought me a volume of Cowper, a pair of ivory hair-combs, and an opinion on every subject I introduced. He had never once asked me a question about myself that he did not then answer himself. I had decided that I could live with a man who told me what I thought, so long as he was good to my father and let the household alone. I had heard worse bargains made by better women. I had told myself that affection might grow, the way ivy grows on a wall, not because the wall invited it, but because the wall holds still. The Duke of Aldermere, Marcus St. Clair Whiston, fifth of his line, godson of my father, owner of an estate 3 hours' ride to the north, had been at our table at Renfield since he was a boy of 9 and I was a girl of 7. He had taught me to load a fowling piece when I was 12. He had laughed at me when I was 14 for crying over a poem. He had brought me a length of Indian silk for my 18th birthday and refused to be thanked. And on the night before I came out, when I was 19 and trembling and convinced I would disgrace myself by curtsying badly, he had taken me into the morning room at Aldermere, set his hands on my shoulders, and said, "Adelaide, you are the only woman of my acquaintance who has never bored me. Do not start tomorrow." Then he had bowed and walked out, and I had laughed until I cried, and I had not disgraced myself. He had never spoken a word of love to me, not in 17 years of acquaintance, not when I was 18 and would have welcomed it, not when I was 23 and a curate's son in Bath had nearly persuaded me into a foolish engagement, not when I was 25 and dancing with him at the Aldermere Harvest Ball, and he had looked at me across the punch bowl as though I were a problem in geometry he could not, for the life of him, solve. I had decided, sometime in the year I was 24, that he had been raised to a duty larger than affection, and that whatever he felt for me, if he felt anything at all, he had set down in a drawer and locked, the way a sensible man locks away the brandy when he has work in the morning. I had been grateful to him, in a low, quiet way, for not asking me to wait for an answer he did not intend to give. I had stopped looking for a sign. And now he had bent to my ear over the pheasant and the boccherini, and said, "Run with me tonight." I rose at the appointed 8 minutes, on the pretext of fetching a shawl, because the dining room was draughty, and my mother, God rest her these 11 years, had taught me that a lady who pleads cold can leave any table without inquiry. My future husband half rose. I waved him down with the smile I had perfected for parish teas. The Dowager Lady Crispin, on my left, complained that she had said all evening the fire wanted feeding, and no one heeded her. I agreed warmly, and slipped out before she could find more grievances. The back stair was unlit. My fingers found the smooth oak rail by long memory. My slippers made no sound on the carpet runner. From the dining room, behind me, came a muffled roar of laughter, and the bright clink of a glass set down too hard. The portrait gallery at Renfield runs the length of the east wing on the first floor. It is 40 paces of polished oak under 23 thorns in oils, beginning with my great-great-grandfather in a cavalier collar, and ending with myself at 16, painted by Mr. Lawrence, who had been kind about my freckles. At this hour the gallery was dark, but for 2 wall sconces near the eastern door, and the long windows showed a sky of low cloud over a moon I could not see. The air smelled of wax and old linseed, and very faintly of the apple wood that had been laid in the morning-room hearth. The Duke was waiting at the third portrait from the door, my grandmother, painted in pale green silk the year before she was widowed. He had not lit any more candles. He stood with his hands behind his back, and his head a little bent, as though he were measuring the woman in the portrait against some memory of his own. And when he heard my slippers on the boards, he turned at once, and came 2 strides to meet me, and stopped. Adelaide. You have 10 minutes, I said. I was proud of the steadiness of my voice. I have given the Dowager Crispin 1,000 reasons to remember this evening. I would prefer not to give her 1,001. What have you learned? He drew breath. He looked, in the low light, both younger and older than his 8 and 20 years. The boy who had taught me to load a fowling piece, and a man I had never met. He had taken off one glove. The bare hand held a folded paper. There is a child, he said. I felt something in my chest go very still, the way a pond goes still when the wind drops. Whose child? Mr. Vance's, a boy of 2.5 years old, living in a respectable cottage in Walthamstow with a young woman named Hannah Mowbray, who was, until 18 months ago, parlour-maid at the chambers in the Temple. Mr. Vance pays a quarterly allowance of £15 and visits on the first Sunday of every month. That is... I stopped. I was a woman of 26. I had read enough novels and walked enough London pavements to know that men of position kept second establishments. It was not the existence of a child that arrested me. That is... distasteful, but not by itself. There is more. His voice was very low. Hannah Mowbray wrote to him a fortnight ago. She had heard of his engagement. She asked him whether his £15 would continue, and whether the boy might still bear his name, and whether the boy might one day be acknowledged to the extent of a small bequest, since the child is still very young and entirely dependent on what she can provide. Marcus. It came out before I could stop it. The boy's name. I had not called him by it since I was 12. He saw it. He did not move toward me, but something in his face moved. Read his reply, he said, and held out the paper. I took it. The folds were sharp. The paper had been a letter for less than a day. The handwriting was Mr. Vance's. I knew it from the engagement notice he had drafted at this very house. The letter was a single page. I read it by the sconce. The letter informed Mrs. Mowbray, in the careful periphrases of a barrister, that upon the celebration of his nuptials, Mr. Vance's affairs would necessarily be reorganized, that the quarterly allowance would be reduced by 2/3, owing to the proper claims of his new household, that the boy was not, in any legal sense, his to acknowledge, and that any future application for assistance, particularly any application pleading the boy's youth or his welfare, would be referred to his clerk and not answered. The letter concluded with a sentence I read twice, and then a third time, because I could not believe a man had set it down in ink. If, Mr. Vance had written, you persist in soliciting after my marriage, I shall be obliged to instruct my clerk that the boy is no concern of mine, and you will find that respectable cottages are leased upon respectable references, of which mine is the only one in your possession. I folded the letter. My hand was perfectly steady. I noticed that, as if from a distance, the way one notices the color of a stranger's coat. Where did you get this? Hannah Mowbray brought it to a clerk in my own chambers this morning. The clerk is her cousin. He brought it to me at 4 this afternoon. I rode from London. I came straight from the road. I have not yet changed for supper. He gestured, almost ruefully, at his coat, and now I saw the dust on the cuffs, the faint mark of a saddle on the inside of his thigh, the shadow of fatigue under his eyes. Adelaide, I would have brought you nothing less than a letter in his own hand. And the child, I said. What of the child? He is very young, as she wrote, and entirely in her keeping. He is otherwise a sturdy little boy. He likes wooden horses and the kitchen cat. Hannah Mowbray is a young woman of 27, sensible, plain-spoken, and devoted to him. She did not write that letter to extort. She wrote it because she was frightened. And you have arranged nothing until I had spoken with you. The child is safe tonight. The cottage is paid through the quarter. Hannah Mowbray is at her sister's in Highbury. She does not sleep at the cottage these last 3 nights. Mr. Vance will not know any of this has been read until he is asked about it. That part is for you. I looked at the letter in my hand. I looked at the portrait of my grandmother, who had been widowed at 31 and had run an estate for 40 years afterwards on her own quiet competence. I looked at the Duke, who had ridden God knew how many hours to put a folded paper in my hand before I made a vow that would have bound me for the rest of my natural life, to a man who would threaten a young woman's reference over the welfare of his own child. "What do you propose, Your Grace?" He took a step nearer. Only one. He did not touch me. "I have a carriage at the South Lodge, not my crested one. A hired chaise, pair of greys, the box driven by a man called Pemberton, who has driven for me for 9 years, and whose discretion I will answer for with my own. The South Lodge is half a mile across the park. We can be there in 12 minutes if we go the lower path. From the South Lodge to Cranfield Abbey, where your aunt, Lady Augusta, resides, is 4 hours by the post road in clear weather. We will arrive before dawn. Your aunt will receive you. By 7, your father will have my own letter, hand-carried by my groom Allwood, explaining where you have gone and why. By 8, my London man of business will have called upon the Bishop's secretary at Lambeth Palace with this letter, a sworn statement from Hannah Mowbray's cousin, and a request that the Bishop withdraw the licence. By 9, when the guests are gathering at St. Mary's, the Bishop's apparitor will be at the church door. And Mr. Vance will arrive at the church to find his licence revoked, and a letter waiting for him at his chambers from your father's solicitor. That last is for your father to write, but I have already, on the way down, drafted a form of words for him. He may use them, or burn them as he likes. You have been very busy this afternoon. I rode hard, he said, and the corner of his mouth pulled, almost a smile. I am very tired. Adelaide, I am not asking you to elope with me. I am asking you to let me drive you to your aunt. I will sleep in the inn at Cranfield Village. I will not enter the Abbey without your invitation. When the licence is withdrawn, and your father has read my letter, I will come back to Renfield and stand in your hall and account for myself to him, to you, and to anyone else who feels owed an account. I will marry no one. I will press no suit. I am asking for one thing only, which is the next 9 hours of your trust. I did not answer for a count of perhaps 15 seconds. In those seconds I heard, very distantly, the Dowager Lady Crispin laugh at something downstairs, and a footman on the back stairs whistle a phrase and stop, and the long case clock in the lower hall begin to chime 10. I heard my own breath. I heard the small, papery rustle of the letter as my fingers tightened. Marcus, I said, why have you said nothing in 17 years? He went very still. That is not the question for tonight. I'm asking it tonight. Adelaide, you are asking me to leave my father's house in the dark on the eve of my wedding in your carriage. I will go. I had decided I would go before you finished the sentence about the bishop. But if I'm to climb into a chaise with you at the South Lodge in 12 minutes, you will not pretend to me that this is all about a child in Walthamstow. I have known you since I was 7. Tell me why you have said nothing. He breathed out. He looked at the portrait of my grandmother. He looked back at me. Because your father was my godfather, he said. Because I came into the title at 22, and into the worst harvest in living memory at 23. And I had 3 years of selling timber and pleading with bankers before I could be sure the estate would hold. He drew breath. The bare hand rose, fell, because when I could have spoken, the autumn you were 22, your father told me, on a walk along the Homewood, that he was glad I had become the man my own father had hoped for, and that the only sorrow in his life was that he had nothing now to leave you but Renfield and a sound name. Would I forgive him if he asked me, as the closest thing to a son he had, to be especially careful of your reputation in any small attentions? Because a girl who had been singled out by a duke and not married by one was a girl who had been damaged for the country market. He did not know what he was asking. He thought he was thanking me. I went home that night and decided I would not approach you until you were settled, and then, once you were settled, I would carry whatever I felt into the ground without a word. That was 3 winters ago. Then a clerk brought me a letter at 4 o'clock this afternoon, and I rode. Because, Adelaide, settled to a man who would write that letter is not settled. It is a sentence, and I will not be the Duke who sits on his hands in a library, while a woman I have loved since the night before her coming out walks into a sentence for the sake of an honourable promise to a father who would, if he knew the truth, set you on the next coach himself. He had not raised his voice. He had said the whole speech in the low, careful tone of a man who had practiced it on the road. But his hand, the bare one, was trembling very slightly at his side, and he saw me see it, and he closed it into a fist.
12 minutes, I said. South Lodge.
Adelaide. I will need a travelling cloak and the small leather case from my dressing room. I cannot ring for my maid. Bessie would come with me, and I will not have her dismissed. I will tell my father in the letter that I borrowed her travelling cloak. She will not be blamed. I will leave my engagement ring on the pincushion. I will write my father 2 lines in the morning room and leave them under the inkwell, so he finds them at first light and not before. I will not have him chasing the chaise on the post road in his nightshirt. You will wait at the South Lodge. If I am not there in 15 minutes, you will leave without me and ride straight to Lambeth Palace yourself. I will wait until you come. 15 minutes, Marcus. If something has gone wrong, I will not have you waiting through my disaster. 15 minutes, he said, and his voice was rough. Adelaide, thank you. Do not thank me yet. Thank me at dawn. I turned to go, and turned back. And Marcus, the letter for my father. Send Allwood with it at 6, not 7. My father wakes at 6. I would rather he read it before the household begins to whisper than after. 6. And do not... I hesitated. Do not let Mr. Vance be told before the bishop has acted. I want the license revoked first. I want him to find that out at the church door. I'm not generally a vindictive woman, Your Grace, but I have read that letter, and I am vindictive tonight. It is already arranged that way. Good. I walked out of the gallery without looking back. I took the back stair to my dressing room. I unhooked my pearls because they had been my mother's, and I would not wear them to a ditching. I changed my satin slippers for half-boots. I folded the ivory and bronze silk over the back of the chair, where Bessie would find it in the morning, and I put on the dark merino travelling dress I had not worn since the spring. I took Bessie's grey wool cloak from the press in the corridor, and left a note inside the sleeve that said only, I have borrowed this. It is my fault, and not yours. A.M.T. In the morning room, I wrote 2 lines to my father, on the cream paper he had given me for my last birthday. Papa, I have gone to Aunt Augusta at Cranfield. There is a letter Mr. Vance wrote a fortnight ago that you must read before 9 o'clock. The Duke of Aldermere will bring it to you with the rest. The wedding cannot go forward. I am safe. I am sorry. I am your loving Adelaide. I sealed it. I weighted it with the silver inkwell. I left the engagement ring, a square emerald in a clumsy setting, on the pincushion beside the inkwell, because I had a sudden, small, mean wish that he would find both at once. I went down the back stair past the servants' hall, where Bessie was eating a slice of cold ham and laughing with the second footman, and I did not look in. I went out through the kitchen garden door and through the wicket into the park. The night was cold. My breath made a small white shape that the wind tore off. The half-moon had come out from behind the cloud and laid a path on the wet grass for me. I walked the lower path because the upper would have taken me past the rose walk, and the rose walk was visible from the dining room windows, and 40 guests with port in them would notice a woman in a grey cloak crossing the lawn. I reached the South Lodge in 9 minutes. My breath came short and warm against the wool of Bessie's cloak. The hem was wet with dew, and a few small dry leaves had caught in the braid. The wind off the home wood carried the bitter green smell of crushed bracken and the cold, thin scent of stone. The chaise was there. The pair of greys were quiet, under a man in a many-caped coat who must have been Pemberton. The Duke stood at the door of the chaise without his hat. When he saw me, his face did a thing I could not read, and then he had the door open, and the steps down, and his hand out, and I set my gloved hand in his bare one, and went up the steps and into the chaise, and he climbed in after me and shut the door, and Pemberton clicked to the greys, and we were moving. The chaise smelled of leather and a faint trace of lavender from the cushion, which someone, Marcus, I realized with a small interior shock, had thought to lay across the seat for a woman in a thin travelling dress on a cold night. "It is 4 hours to Cranfield," he said. "You should sleep. I will sit up. You will not be disturbed." "I will not sleep." "Then we will be silent. I will not press conversation on you tonight." I looked at him in the small, swaying lantern light. He had put his glove back on. His face was the face of a man who had ridden hard for 6 hours and would not let himself rest until he had set me down at a door he could trust. He had not, I noticed, asked me whether I loved him. He had not asked me whether, when the wedding was undone and the scandal was contained and the season had begun, I would let him court me. He had asked me for the next 9 hours of my trust, and nothing else. And he meant it. "Marcus, Adelaide, tell me about the boy." He looked surprised. Then he settled back into the cushion and folded his hands on his knee, and began, in the low, even voice of a man telling a story to a child at bedtime, to tell me everything Hannah Mowbray's cousin had told him about a sturdy little boy in Walthamstow who liked wooden horses and the kitchen cat, and was called, after his mother's father, Samuel. He spoke without sentiment and without varnish. He said the boy had a small, wiry frame for his age, and was otherwise hardy as a pony. He said Hannah Mowbray read to him every evening from a Bible her grandmother had left her, and that the boy could already pick out his own name in the page. He said the cottage was clean, the rent was paid through Michaelmas, and the landlord was a Methodist deacon who would not, under any threat from Mr. Vance, turn out a young woman in good standing. I sat with my hands folded over the letter, which I had brought with me, and listened. And somewhere between Hannah Mowbray's grandmother's Bible and the Methodist deacon, I began to cry, very quietly, in a way I had not cried since I lost my mother. I cried for the boy in Walthamstow, whom I had never met. I cried for Hannah Mowbray, who had written a frightened letter and received an obscenity in reply. I cried for the woman I would have been at noon, sitting in a wedding breakfast, with my hand in the hand of a man who had set that obscenity in ink. I cried, last and least, for myself. The Duke did not move. He did not offer a handkerchief. He sat across from me in the swaying chaise and let me cry, the way a person who loves you lets you cry, without trying to stop it, or improve it, or convert it into anything else. When I had finished, he said, "There is a handkerchief in the seat pocket. I had Pemberton put one there. It is clean." I laughed. It was a small, wet laugh, more breath than sound. "You thought of everything." "I thought of nothing else for 6 hours on horseback." "Marcus, Adelaide, do not. Not tonight. Tonight is for the boy in Walthamstow and the licence at Lambeth. We will speak of ourselves when there is no wedding hanging over us. I will not have you confuse gratitude for anything else. I have too much respect for both of us." I took the handkerchief. I wiped my face. I folded the square of cambric into my palm and closed my fingers over it, and I did not give it back. We rode in silence after that, while the chaise crested the small hill past the homewood, and the lights of Renfield Hall dropped away behind us into the dark. The greys settled into the steady trot Pemberton had set, and the moon came out of the cloud entirely and turned the post road silver, and I sat with a letter in one hand and a handkerchief in the other, and thought, with a kind of dazed clarity, that in 9 hours I had been intended to become Mrs. Edmund Vance, and would instead be, by dawn, the bride who was not. I tried to be frightened of that. I could not, quite, find the fear. What I found instead was an old, quiet thing I had not felt in months, which was the sense of being precisely where my own conscience required me to be. I slept, after all, though I had said I would not, somewhere past the village of Ditchley. When I woke, the sky behind the chaise window was the colour of pewter, and the trees along the post road were beginning to take their shapes back from the night. and the Duke had taken off his greatcoat and laid it over me without waking me, and was sitting in his shirt sleeves and waistcoat against the opposite cushion, watching the road behind us through the small back window, the way a man watches a road for pursuit. "No one has come," he said, when he saw I was awake. "We are almost there. Another 20 minutes. You are cold." "I am not." "Marcus." "I am perfectly well. Drink the barley water. There is a flask in the pocket. Your aunt's housekeeper will give us hot tea inside 10 minutes of our arrival. I will be warm enough then." The greys settled to a slow trot as we crested the last hill. I could hear, through the chaise window, the wet press of hooves on the soft road and the distant rough creak of an early cart on the lane below. A wood smoke smell drifted up from a farmhouse chimney we could not see. We came up the avenue at Cranfield Abbey as the eastern sky was paling to the colour of the inside of an oyster shell. The Abbey is an old grey house with a tower at the south end and a chapel ruin at the north, and Aunt Augusta, my mother's elder sister, widowed at 40, mistress of Cranfield for 32 years and of her own opinions for 60, was standing in the porch with a shawl over her nightdress and her hair in a single iron-grey plait down her back. She had been expecting us, I realised. Marcus had sent ahead. "Adelaide," she said, when the steps were down and I was on the gravel, "get into the house. Marcus, do not stand there bowing at me at this hour. Come inside. There is tea. There are eggs. There is a fire. Pemberton, take the chaise to the stable and tell Jenkins to feed those greys and yourself in that order. Adelaide, my dear, come." She did not embrace me on the gravel. She waited until the door was shut behind us and the great hall fire was at my back, and then she put both her thin, strong hands on my shoulders and looked into my face and said, "You have done the right thing. We will discuss the particulars over toast." Then she did embrace me, briefly and fiercely, and I cried into her shawl for the second time that night, less and more quietly than before. It was, by the clock in the hall, 23 minutes past 5. The fire in the hearth behind me had been newly fed, the dry, split applewood was beginning to crack, and the smoke had the sweet, sharp smell of old orchard wood. My shoulders, under the borrowed cloak, finally let down. Aunt Augusta sat us down at the small round table in her morning room, where she took breakfast when she had no guests, and Mrs. Pine, the housekeeper, brought toast and eggs, and a pot of tea that could have stood a horseshoe. And Marcus and I ate, because we had been told to. Aunt Augusta had read the letter while the eggs were cooking. She set it down on the cloth, smoothed it once with the side of her hand, and said, "Well, he is exactly the kind of man I thought he was. I am only sorry, Adelaide, that I did not press your father harder when he announced the engagement." "You said nothing at the time." "I said a great deal at the time, in writing, and your father wrote back to me that he had considered my objections and rejected them, and that as I had not chosen to marry myself, I could not be expected to understand the question. I burned his letter and sent him a Christmas goose. I have regretted both." She buttered a piece of toast. "What now, Your Grace?" Marcus set down his cup. "My groom, Allwood, is on the post road to Renfield with a letter for Sir Rowland. He will arrive between 6 and 6 1/4. Marcus turned his cup a quarter in its saucer. "My man Hartwell is at his lodging in Doctors' Commons. He will breakfast at 6, walk to Lambeth at 1/2, and present the letter and the sworn statement to the bishop's apparitor at 7. The licence will be withdrawn by 7:30. The apparitor will be at the door of St. Mary's by 8:30, in time to inform the verger and to put a notice on the church door before the guests arrive." Aunt Augusta set down her piece of toast and waited. "Mr. Vance will arrive at 9. He will find the notice. He will discover, on inquiry, that the bishop has received and credited a letter in his own hand, which makes the marriage impossible. He will retreat to Sir Rowland's library. Sir Rowland will, by then, have read my letter and read the original of his own, and the conversation between them will be of a kind I do not envy either party." "You have not told Sir Rowland where Adelaide has gone?" "I have. I have told him she is with you. I have told him that I drove her, and that I will be at the inn at Cranfield Village by 8, and that I am at his disposal for any communication he wishes to have with me. I have also told him that I will not enter this house without his written invitation, and that I will not pay my respects to his daughter in person until she has set a day. I have asked his pardon for the manner of it. I have offered him no excuse but the letter." Aunt Augusta looked at him a long moment. Then she said, "You will not sleep at the inn. You will sleep in the south wing. You will not see Adelaide at breakfast or at dinner. You will see her at the noon hour for half an hour in this room with me at the table. That is for the gossip and for her father. It is not for me. I have my own opinion, which is that you have behaved tonight in a manner that would have made your own father weep with pride. And I shall write him a letter to say so as soon as I have finished my eggs. Adelaide, you will go to bed at 7, and you will sleep until noon. Mrs. Pine will sit in the dressing room with a piece of sewing in case you wake and want her. Do not argue with me. You may begin to have opinions again at noon." I did not argue. I went up the wide oak stairs at 5 minutes before 6, with Mrs. Pine carrying a warming pan and my aunt's voice in the hall below already issuing instructions to the boot boy about a pony cart to the village inn and a hot breakfast for the Duke to be sent up to the south wing. And as I went, I heard, through the open library door, my aunt say to Marcus, "Sit down, my dear. You have done a long night's work. Tell me, while you eat, what you intend, and let me tell you what I will permit." I did not hear his answer. I did not need to. By the time the chambermaid drew my curtains, I was already asleep, with the cambric handkerchief still folded in my hand under the pillow, and the wedding I had been promised at 9 was, somewhere in a small town to the east, beginning to come undone. The bed smelled of clean linen and dry lavender. A wood pigeon called in the elms. The curtains breathed in the wind off the downs and breathed out again, soft and slow, against my closed eyes. Allwood arrived at Renfield Hall at 3 minutes past 6, on a tired bay he had been riding since 4:30. He gave the letter to Hodges the butler, who took it to Sir Rowland in his dressing room, where my father was being shaved by his man Jordan, with the somewhat unsteady hand that follows a port-soaked rehearsal supper. Sir Rowland read the letter, while Jordan held the razor away from his throat. He read it a second time. He told Jordan to leave him, and Jordan left him, and Sir Rowland Thorne sat down on the edge of his bed in his shirt-sleeves, with a folded paper in his hands, and wept. For shame, for relief, for the daughter he had nearly sold to a man who had set such a sentence in ink, and for the godson who had ridden through the night to take that daughter out of the house, before he, her own father, had thought to ask the right question. When he had finished weeping, he rang for Hodges. He told Hodges to summon the curate, the bishop's secretary, his own solicitor, and the cook, in that order. He told Hodges to inform the under-housekeeper that the wedding breakfast was cancelled, and the cold meats were to be sent down to the village school. He told Hodges to tell Bessie to pack a small case of my belongings for Cranfield Abbey by the early afternoon coach. He told Hodges, last, to inform Mr. Vance, when Mr. Vance arrived at the door at 8:30 in his wedding coat, that Sir Rowland would receive him in the library. Mr. Vance arrived at 23 minutes past 8. He was wearing a coat the colour of pale claret, and a waistcoat of cream silk embroidered with bees. He was in good spirits. He had a small posy of forced violets in his buttonhole. He never reached the church. What passed between him and my father in the library is not, properly, my story. I have it only from a letter my father wrote me 2 days later, in which he confessed that he had begun the interview with the intention of behaving like a gentleman, and had abandoned the intention within 4 minutes. He had set Mr. Vance's own letter on the desk between them, and asked him to read it aloud. Mr. Vance had read 3 lines and refused to read further. My father had read the rest aloud himself, slowly, in the voice he reserved for the lessons in the parish school. He had then asked Mr. Vance whether he denied the letter. Mr. Vance had not. He had asked whether Mr. Vance denied the boy. Mr. Vance had said that the boy was a private matter and had no bearing on the marriage. My father had said that any boy of 2.5 years who could be threatened in ink by his own father was a matter on which he, Sir Rowland, was prepared to have a public bearing as long as he had breath in him. and had then told Mr. Vance that the license had been withdrawn by the bishop at 20 minutes past 7, and that the door of the library was, at that present moment, the only door of Renfield Hall through which Mr. Vance would ever again pass, and that Mr. Vance would now pass through it, and not return. Mr. Vance had then made his only intelligent contribution to the morning, which was to walk out without a word, climb back into his hired chaise, and instruct his driver to return to London. He was on the road to town by 9:15. The notice on the church door went up at 5 minutes to 9. The first guests arrived at 4 minutes past, looked at the notice, looked at one another, and dispersed to the inns of 3 neighbouring villages to begin the most exciting morning of gossip in the county since the Pemberton balloon ascension of 1817. It was, on balance, a much better managed cancellation than most. The bishop had done his part. My father had done his. Marcus had done his. Even Mr. Vance, by removing himself from the parish in good time, had spared us all a scene at the church. The only person whose part remained undone was mine. I woke at 20 minutes past noon, with the cambric handkerchief still in my hand, and Mrs. Pine sitting in the window with a basket of mending. She rose at once, drew my curtains a little further, told me my aunt expected me in the morning room in 3/4 of an hour, and went out without fuss to fetch a basin of hot water. I lay in the strange bed, in the strange room, and listened to the rooks in the elms outside, and tried to take the measure of what I now was. The linen smelled of lavender, and a faint trace of beeswax. The pillow was cooler than my cheek. I was not a bride. I was not, by any reading of the social contract, ruined. I had travelled with the Duke at night, but I had travelled in a hired chaise with his groom on the box, to the house of my own aunt, with the full knowledge of my father by 6 o'clock, and not a single one of those facts could be twisted into the kind of story that hangs a woman in society. I was the daughter of a baronet whose engagement had been called off, by mutual consent and on grounds of revealed character, 12 hours before the ceremony. I would be talked of for a season. I would be received afterwards. The county was not London. The county liked Marcus, and had never particularly liked Mr. Vance, who was a barrister from somewhere in Sussex with chambers that nobody had ever visited, and the discovery that he had a child in Walthamstow he was prepared to threaten in ink would not, in the long run, hurt me. It would hurt him. What I was, I decided, was a woman in her own life again. For the first time since the day my father had shown me the ledger, I would go down to a meal in someone's house without the small, steady weight of the wedding pressing against the inside of my chest. I rose. I washed. I let Mrs. Pine dress my hair in a single plait wound at the nape, because I had not the patience for anything else. I put on the morning dress my aunt had laid out, a high-necked dove grey with a band of slate satin at the hem, which had been hers when she was young and was a little long on me, and I went down to the morning room at 1 o'clock precisely. The morning room at Cranfield smelled of beeswax and wood smoke, with a thin, sweet note of the hyacinths Aunt Augusta forced in stone jars along the south window. A wedge of bright, cold sun lay across the rug. The silver teapot threw a small, bright coin of light on the wall above the hearth. Marcus was already there, standing at the window with his back to the door. He had bathed and shaved, and changed into a dark grey coat I recognized from the harvest ball 2 autumns before, and he turned at the sound of my step with a kind of careful composure that did not entirely disguise the fact that he had been listening for me down the long corridor for the last quarter hour. Aunt Augusta was at the table behind a tea-tray. "Adelaide," said my aunt. "Sit. Tea. Cake. I have news from Renfield, the bishop, the village, and your father, in that order. Your wedding is undone. Your father wept twice and ate his breakfast. The village is loyally appalled at Mr. Vance, and inappropriately delighted at the Duke. The bishop's apparitor was thoroughly Christian about it, and accepted a glass of brandy from your father at 10. You may consider yourself, in the formal sense, a single woman of independent fortune as of 9 o'clock this morning. Tea, my dear. Tea, please." She poured. Marcus took the chair opposite me. He had not yet spoken. He looked, in daylight, almost as tired as he had at midnight. but the lines around his mouth had eased a little. "How long shall I stay here, Aunt?" 3 weeks at least. 6 is better. The neighbors will call this afternoon. I shall receive them and tell them you are resting after a long night's drive, which is unimpeachably true. By the end of the week, we shall begin to take walks and to be visible. By the end of the second week, you will be received at the Criswells for dinner. Lady Criswell is my best friend in the county, and will see to it that the right women are present. By the end of the 4th week, the question of your engagement to Mr. Vance will be a story that begins, "Do you remember when?" and ends, "Well, she was quite right to walk away." By the 6th week, you will be a curiosity, which is, in the social sense, an asset. Marcus. Lady Augusta. You will be at this house no more than twice a week, on Wednesdays and Saturdays, between 2 and 4 in the afternoon, in this room, with me present. You will write to Adelaide at any other interval you please, provided your letters could be read aloud at a vicarage tea. You will offer her no addresses of any kind for 3 months. At the end of 3 months, if she gives you leave, you may speak. If she does not give you leave, you will withdraw with grace, and resume the friendship her father has always understood you to have with her, and you will not allude to this night again. Those are my terms, and I've written them in the letter I sent your mother by the noon post, which she will receive at Aldermere by 6 o'clock, so do not pretend you have not heard them. I accept your terms. Adelaide. Yes, Aunt. Are these terms acceptable to you? I looked at Marcus across the small round table with the silver pot and the cake stand and the slice of seed cake I had not yet touched. He looked back at me, perfectly steady, with the same expression he had worn in my grandmother's portrait gallery, which had been, I now recognized, the expression of a man asking a question he had no right to ask, and was prepared to live with any answer. They are acceptable, I said, with one revision. Name it. Marcus may come 3 times a week, Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays after the morning service. I should like in a church. Aunt Augusta raised an eyebrow. For appearances. For company. Granted. She lifted her cup. To revisions, then. Have your tea, the pair of you, and tell me, Adelaide, whether you would like me to write to your father today, or whether you would prefer to write to him yourself. I will write to him myself. Good girl. Cake, Your Grace. Thank you, Lady Augusta. Marcus, my dear, you look as though you have not slept since the day before yesterday. Eat the cake. You will need the sugar for the ride home. I am not having you collapse off your horse on the avenue and frighten the rooks. Adelaide, would you pass the Duke the cake stand? I passed Marcus the cake stand. Our fingers did not touch. Aunt Augusta noted, with the satisfaction of a woman who has arranged a small thing well, that they did not touch, and went on pouring tea. The fortnight that followed was, in the eyes of the county, the quietest fortnight in living memory. Letters came. My father wrote daily. The first 3 letters apologies, the 4th and following an account of the household and of his digestion. He had taken the curate into his confidence and was, by the end of the first week, taking the curate's advice on the matter of a small annual allowance to a Mrs. Mowbray of Walthamstow for the maintenance and education of a boy named Samuel, the allowance to be paid through the solicitor, and to begin at once, and to continue until the boy was of an age to apprentice or to school, as Mrs. Mowbray should think best. My father wrote that he had insisted, against the curate's gentler advice, that the boy be told, when he was old enough to be told anything, that the money came from his godfather, who was a baronet in Sussex, with whom he had no other connection, and that the boy might one day, if he chose, write to him. My father wrote, in the same letter, that he had not slept easy in his bed since the night I went, that he had not, in the long account he had been making in his head, found any way to pay back his godson the Duke for what the Duke had done for our family, that he had decided in the end that the only payment that signified was to be a better father for the time that remained. I cried over that letter too. I cried over a great many letters that fortnight. Aunt Augusta said that I was making up for 26 years of restraint, and that I should let myself, and that she would have Mrs. Pine keep the linen cupboard well stocked with handkerchiefs until I was finished. I let myself. Mr. Vance did not write to me. Mr. Vance wrote, instead, to my father's solicitor, threatening an action for breach of promise and laying his damages at £2,000. The solicitor wrote back, by the same post, that he had in his possession the original of a letter in Mr. Vance's own hand, which would, if produced in any court of law in England, end Mr. Vance's practice at the temple within the calendar year, and that he had been instructed, in the event of any further communication on the subject of damages, to lodge a copy of that letter with the inn of which Mr. Vance was a member. Mr. Vance did not write a second letter. We did not, on the whole, expect him to. Marcus came on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and on Sunday after church, exactly as Aunt Augusta had decreed. He did not come on any other day. He wrote to me 3 times in the fortnight. Once to send me an article he had read in a journal about a school for the children of seamen at Greenwich. Once to send me a small parcel of seed pods from the Aldermere walled garden that he thought I might like to try in Aunt Augusta's south border, and once to tell me, with a brevity that made me laugh aloud at the breakfast table, that his mother, the Dowager Duchess, had read Aunt Augusta's letter at 6 o'clock as promised, had read it a second time after dinner, had written to Aunt Augusta in reply at 9:30 to say that the terms were not severe enough, and that 2 visits a week were a great deal too many for a man who had abducted a woman on the eve of her wedding. He was therefore confining himself, in deference to his mother, to 1 visit a week, of which Adelaide might choose the day. I wrote back to him at once, by the same evening post, to say that I would not allow his mother to govern my Wednesdays, that he might come on both, and that he should write to his mother by the next post to say that the matter had been settled by the woman in question, who had given the matter the consideration it deserved over a slice of seed cake, and had spoken. He brought me, the following Wednesday, the Dowager Duchess's 3-line reply to that letter, which read, "She is right. You are presumptuous. I withdraw. I keep it still." He courted me very slowly and very plainly, and entirely in front of my aunt. He courted me by asking me what I had read that morning and what I had thought of it, and by listening to the answer in full. He courted me by remembering, on his second Wednesday, that I had mentioned on his first Wednesday a small etching of the chapel ruin I had liked, and by bringing me, on his third, the etching, framed, with a note attached that said only, "For the south parlour wall, where you will see it from your usual chair." He courted me by sitting through 3/4 of an hour with Aunt Augusta on a Sunday afternoon, while she discussed the failings of the new curate and the merits of an old breed of laying hen, and by responding to both with the steady, serious attention he had always given her on matters of the laying hen, and had never previously, to my knowledge, given to any curate. He courted me by laughing at the right moments and at none of the wrong ones, and by walking with me, on the 3rd Saturday, 3 times around the Rose Walk, while Aunt Augusta watched from the morning-room window, and by not, in all 3 turns, attempting to take my hand. We talked, on those walks, of small things and of large. The wind off the downs carried the smell of cold, turned earth and the last apples in the orchard, and our breath made small grey shapes that the air pulled apart. Of the boy in Walthamstow, who was, by Marcus's last report from his clerk, perfectly well, and the proud possessor of a wooden horse with a real horsehair tail that the clerk's wife had made for him. Of Hannah Mowbray, who had taken the solicitor's settlement with a steady hand, and had set up a small school for the daughters of clerks in the back parlour of the Walthamstow cottage, and who had written to me, very properly, a single letter of thanks, which I had answered, equally properly, with a single letter of welcome. Of my father, who had begun, slowly, to dine again at the table with the curate and the cook's husband on Tuesdays, the 3 of them establishing a small habit of toasted cheese and political argument, that the curate confessed in his last letter he had begun to anticipate with something like pleasure. Of Aldermere, which Marcus would have to leave to ride home to by sundown, but to which he wished, every Wednesday, to bring me, in time, if I were ever willing to come. He never said when. He never said as my wife. He said only, in time, if you were willing, and he said it as a man states a fact, not as a man presses a suit. I will tell you of the day Mr. Vance came back, because that is the day that signifies. It was a Tuesday, in the 5th week of my stay at Cranfield. Marcus was not expected. He was at his quarter sessions in Lincoln. Aunt Augusta and I had walked, after breakfast, down the long avenue to the lodge gate, to look at a hedge a neighbour had asked our opinion on. We were coming back up the avenue at 10:30, when a chaise turned in at the gate behind us, and Aunt Augusta turned and looked and said, very quietly, "Adelaide, go into the house. Tell Hodges to send the boot boy for the steward, and to bar the inner door. I will meet whoever this is on the gravel." I did not go on to the house. I am 26 years old. I had survived a rehearsal supper, and I would not have my aunt of 60 meeting Mr. Vance alone on her own gravel. I took her arm, and we walked back to meet the chaise together. It was Mr. Vance. He looked thinner than I remembered, and he had not had the violets in his buttonhole. He climbed down without waiting for the step. He had a small leather case in his hand, and a hat he did not remove. "Miss Thorne," he said. He looked past my aunt, as though she were a piece of garden statuary, which was a tactical decision that did not survive the next 3 sentences. "I have come to speak with you on a private matter." "You will speak with my niece, Mr. Vance," said Aunt Augusta, in the voice she had once used to tell a poacher he had 2 minutes to leave her woods. "In the presence of her aunt, in the morning room, where my butler and my steward will be within the sound of any raised voice. You may speak with her on that condition, or you may climb back into your chaise and apply to her father at Renfield in writing. You will not address her on my gravel." He breathed in through his nose. He had, I now observed, the look of a man who had not slept very well since the morning the bishop had revoked his license. "As you wish." We walked back to the house. Hodges, who had seen us through the porch glass, had already sent the boot boy for the steward, and the steward was, by the time we reached the morning room, standing inside the hall door with his arms crossed, and a quiet expression I had not previously known he possessed. Aunt Augusta nodded at him. He nodded back. She showed Mr. Vance into the morning room and closed the door. "Now, Mr. Vance," said my aunt, sitting down on the small sofa and gesturing me to the chair beside her. "Say what you have come to say." Mr. Vance did not sit. He stood in front of the cold hearth, with his hat in one hand and the leather case in the other, and looked, for the first time, at me. There was, I think, a small piece of him that had come prepared to be charming. I watched him decide, in the 4 seconds between the door closing and his first word, that charm would be a wasted economy. "Miss Thorne, I have come to ask you to reconsider your decision." "My decision is not under reconsideration, Mr. Vance. You are aware that the action for breach of promise, which I instructed my solicitor to commence, was withdrawn within a week of being threatened. Yes, I am aware. My father's solicitor, Mr. Hartwell, kept me apprised. There is he hesitated, a question of damages." "Mr. Vance," said Aunt Augusta, "we did not ask you here to discuss damages. You asked to be allowed in. Speak to my niece on the matter you have come on, or take your leave." "I have come," said Mr. Vance, and now I saw that his hand on the leather case was not entirely steady, "to inform you that the circumstances which were brought before the bishop have been, that is, that the woman in Walthamstow has been—" He could not get to the end of the sentence. "Has been what, Mr. Vance?" "Has been settled. With. The settlement has been formalized. The boy has been placed in a respectable school in the country. The matter is closed." "Is that so?" Aunt Augusta inquired, mildly. "Where is the school?" Mr. Vance opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. "I am not at liberty." "Mr. Vance," I said. I had not raised my voice. I did not raise it now. "Hannah Mowbray runs a small school in the back parlour of her cottage in Walthamstow for the daughters of clerks. Samuel Mowbray is in his mother's care, attending no school, since he is 2 3/4 years old, and is, by the most recent report I have, in robust health and very fond of a wooden horse my father's solicitor sent him at Christmas. The boy has not been placed anywhere. The matter is not closed. You have either been misled by a person whose interest it served to mislead you, Or you have come to my aunt's morning room to set a falsehood in my hearing, in the hope that I would be moved by your supposed reform, to overlook the letter you wrote on the 17th of August, of which I have read every word, and of which my father has the original. I assume the second. I am not moved. He had gone the colour of paper. You will not. You cannot. Mr. Vance, said Aunt Augusta, rising, my niece has spoken. You will now leave. My steward will see you to your chaise. If you address her again, by visit or by letter, the letter of the 17th of August will be in the hands of the benchers of your inn by the next post. Do you understand me? He understood her. He left. He did not look at me a second time. The chaise wheels were on the gravel within 4 minutes of his rising. When the sound of them had gone down the avenue and through the lodge gate, Aunt Augusta sat down again on the small sofa and rang for tea. Well, my dear, she said, I've not enjoyed a morning so much in 3 years. Aunt. What? Thank you. For what? You did the speaking. I only managed the door. She regarded me over the rim of the freshly arrived teacup with her shrewdest expression. Adelaide, you did not flinch. I know. 3 months ago you would have flinched. I know. Marcus will come on Wednesday. I know. Do you know what you will say to him on Wednesday? I thought about it. I drank a swallow of tea. I set the cup back in its saucer with a small, clear sound. I will say to him on Wednesday that I would like him to come on Thursdays as well. Will you, indeed? And that I would like him, on the 4th Thursday from this, to bring his mother. His mother? Aunt Augusta's eyebrow rose. The Dowager Duchess of Aldermere, whose 3-line letter the man keeps in his coat pocket, which, I have it on the steward's authority, that he reads when he thinks himself unobserved on the avenue. That mother. That mother. Adelaide, are you proposing to allow that man to speak? I am proposing to give him leave to speak, Aunt. I am not yet decided what I shall say when he does. But I am decided that I shall not have his mother present, and not let him say it. She smiled. It was the smile she had given me on the porch at 5 in the morning, when I had stepped out of the chaise. It was the smile of a woman who has been waiting for a particular thing for a long time, and has the sense, at last, that it is coming. Very well, she said. Wednesday. Marcus came on Wednesday at 2, on his own horse, which he had ridden from the quarter sessions in Lincoln through the rain. He came in with his hair damp at the temples, and the smell of wet wool about his coat. Aunt Augusta gave him a towel and a cup of tea, and the news, in that order, that Mr. Vance had called on Tuesday morning, that he had attempted to introduce a fiction, that I had corrected the fiction, that Aunt Augusta had shown him the gravel, and that I had a small request to put to him concerning his calendar. My calendar? Yes, Marcus. Tell me. I would like you, I said, to come on Thursdays, as well as Wednesdays and Saturdays. And on the 4th Thursday from this, that will be the 22nd, I would like you to bring your mother. He set the cup down. He did it carefully, as a man does who has been startled and does not wish to spill anything. His eyes, when they came back to my face, had a quality I had not seen in them before, and which I will not here attempt to describe, except to say that I had been mistaken, perhaps for some years, in believing that I knew the whole of his face. You wish me to bring my mother? I do. On the 22nd. On the 22nd. To what end, Adelaide? To the end, Marcus, I said, that you have asked, since the night of the rehearsal supper, for permission to speak. I would like you to speak. I would like your mother present when you do. I would like Aunt Augusta present. I would like, before I give you any answer at all, the question to be one I have been allowed to consider as a woman who is freely making a choice in front of the 2 women whose judgment I most trust. I do not want any answer I give to be one I gave because I was alone in a room with you, and grateful, and 26 years old. I want it to be an answer my 18-year-old self and my 40-year-old self would both approve. He was silent for a long count. I've asked nothing of you in 5 weeks, Adelaide. You have asked everything of me, Marcus, in 5 weeks. You have asked it by being precisely the man you have been. I am not insensible. I would simply prefer, when you ask it in words, that there be witnesses." He let out a breath. He laughed very softly, not the bright laugh of the rehearsal supper, but a low, private laugh I had not heard from him since we were children. The 22nd. At 2. My mother will come. I had assumed she would. Aunt Augusta has already written to her. Of course she has. Marcus. Adelaide. Drink your tea. You are damp and cold. We will speak in due course of the answer. We will not speak of it today. Today is a Wednesday. Today is a Wednesday. He drank his tea. The 22nd was a clear, cold day, with a thin sun and the wind off the downs. The frost had held in the hollows of the avenue all morning, and the rooks in the elms above the porch made a brisk, dark crack of sound against the bright air. Marcus arrived at 1:45, with his mother, the Dowager Duchess of Aldermere, in a closed carriage. She was a small, upright woman of 58, in a pelisse of bottle green velvet with a row of jet buttons, and she came into the morning room without flourish and embraced Aunt Augusta on the cheek, and offered me her gloved hand and said, "Miss Thorne, I have wished to make your acquaintance under happier circumstances for 7 years. I am glad it is at last. May I sit? Please, Your Grace. Augusta, may I trouble you for tea? You will have tea, my dear, and Mrs. Pine's almond cakes, of which she has made an indecent quantity in your honour. Marcus, the chair by the window. Adelaide, beside me on the sofa. Your Grace, the wing chair, if you will indulge me. It has the best view of all 4 of us, which I imagine you wish." The Dowager Duchess sat in the wing chair. She ranged her gloved hands in her lap. The silk of her pelisse made a soft, dry whisper against the velvet of the chair, and her bright, dark eyes took in the 4 of us in a single sweep. She looked at her son with an expression I would, by the end of the afternoon, come to recognize as her form of affection. "Marcus, speak." He spoke. He spoke for perhaps 5 minutes. He did not stand. He did not make a speech. He set his teacup on the small table beside him, and he addressed me, across the morning room, in the same low, even voice he had used at midnight in my grandmother's portrait gallery. And he said the thing he had not said in 17 years. He said he had been in love with me since the night I was 19, and he had taken me into the morning room at Aldermere to tell me not to be afraid of my coming out. He said he had decided that night, on the long ride home, that he would not speak. That he had decided again, every year afterwards, that he would not speak. That the decision had been the right decision for the autumn. His father gave him the estate in distress, and the right decision for the 3 winters he had spent saving it. And the right decision for the autumn. My father had asked him to be careful of my reputation. The decision had become, by long use, the only decision he could imagine making. He said he had ridden through the night on the 20th of August in the conviction that he was riding to save me from a marriage of cruelty. He had discovered, somewhere between Renfield and Cranfield, that he had also been riding because he could not, after 17 years of silence, sit in his library at Aldermere, and that a woman he had loved for 7 of those years walk into a sentence without telling her so. He said he had not spoken at Cranfield in 5 weeks, because he had asked for the next 9 hours of my trust, and intended to keep within the letter of his asking. He said he was speaking now because I had asked him to, and because his mother was present, and because Aunt Augusta was present, and because he wished his offer to be entirely on the record. He said that he asked me to consider, when I had time and the considered counsel of the 2 women whose judgment I most trusted, whether I would be willing to marry him in due course, by a date of my own choosing, at the village church at Cranfield, with as little fuss and as much joy as could be managed. That he asked nothing now, and required no answer in the room. That he would withdraw with grace at any answer I gave or any delay I required, and that he would, if I refused, count it the best work of his life that he had been permitted, on the night of the 20th of August, to drive me to my aunt's door. He stopped. He looked at his teacup. He looked back at me. The Dowager Duchess, in the wing chair, lifted her own cup and drank, and set it down, and said, "Well, Augusta, that was rather better than I expected." "It was an adequate speech," said Aunt Augusta, "for a man who has been rehearsing it for 7 years. 3 of which under my roof. I am relieved he had it finally out of his system. Adelaide, Aunt, you owe him no answer today. I know it. You owe him no answer this week, or this month, or this season. I know it. What do you wish to say?" I looked at Marcus. He was sitting forward a little in the chair, with his hands loosely linked between his knees, and his face was the face of a man who had committed to wait as long as required. He had said exactly what he had set himself to say. He had not, in any moment of those 5 minutes, asked me for pity. "I wish to say," I said, "that I do not need the season." The Dowager Duchess set down her cup again. "I wish to say," I said, "that I have not been asked, in 26 years, a question better put. That I am aware, as I sit here, that any answer I give in this room I will live with for the rest of my life, and that I would prefer to live with the answer I have, rather than to discover, in 3 weeks, or 3 months, or 3 years, that I sent away the man who rode through a night to put a folded letter in my hand, and married instead someone safer. I have already had the safer offer. I have read his letter. I do not propose to make that mistake twice. Adelaide. Marcus. Are you saying... I am saying that I will marry you, in due course, by a date of my own choosing, at the village church at Cranfield, with as little fuss and as much joy as can be managed." He did not move. He did not speak. He had not, I think, allowed himself to imagine, in the 5 weeks of his careful courtship, the precise sentence I had just spoken. And he did not, for a count of perhaps 4 seconds, know what to do with his face. It was the Dowager Duchess who rescued him. "My dear son," she said, "stand up. Come over. Take her hand. You have my permission, and Lady Augusta's permission, and most particularly the lady's own permission. Do not, for the love of heaven, do it from a chair." Marcus stood up. The chair behind him gave a small, soft creak. He came across the morning room in 3 steps. The floor under the rug answered each one with a low, quiet thud. He stopped in front of the sofa where I sat. He held out his bare hand. I set mine into it. He bent, not over my hand, but to my face, very slowly, with a kind of careful disbelief. And he kissed me, once, on the brow, the way a man kisses a thing he had not expected to be allowed to touch. Adelaide. Marcus. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. Thank me on the wedding day. He laughed. It was the bright laugh again, the laugh of the rehearsal supper. Only this time, it was not aimed at a long table of guests and a future husband's joke, and there were 2 old women in the room who had earned the right to hear it. He laughed, and he sat down on the sofa beside me, and he held my hand on his knee, and the Dowager Duchess, after watching us for a long moment, took out a small cambric handkerchief and applied it briskly to one eye. "Well, Augusta," she said, "I suppose we must now discuss the practicalities." "There is a great deal to discuss." "There is the matter of the boy." "Indeed there is." "My son, in his speech, did not mention the boy. I assume he intends to." Marcus looked at his mother. He looked at me. There was a small flush along his cheekbone. I had intended to ask Adelaide privately. "You will ask her here, Marcus, and have done. I have already discussed it with Augusta and your mother. Whatever the answer is, it will be the answer of all 4 of us, since the boy is now the responsibility of all 4 houses concerned." Aunt Augusta lifted her cup. "Ask." Marcus looked at me. The flush had gone darker. "Adelaide, there is a boy of 3 years old in Walthamstow. He is not my child. He is not your child. He is the child of a woman who, by her courage in bringing a letter to a clerk in my chambers on the 20th of August, saved you from a marriage you did not wish to make, and saved him, in due course, from being raised by a man who could write the letter we have all read. He paused. Aunt Augusta poured a slow ribbon of tea into the dowager's cup. Sun struck the silver pot. Marcus drew breath and went on. Hannah Mowbray is, by every report, a remarkable young woman who has done remarkable things with very little. The boy is in her care and is, by her wish, to remain in her care. I would not propose to remove him. I do not believe any of us would. But it had been in my mind that when the school question becomes urgent in a year or two, we might wish, that is, that you and I might wish, to take some practical interest in the matter, in such a form as Mrs. Mowbray and Samuel themselves would welcome. I am asking, in short, whether you would be willing to consider, in due course, becoming godparents to that boy, with such regularity of visits and such material support as Mrs. Mowbray finds welcome, and the boy, in time, learns to expect. Yes. I had a longer answer prepared. It would have been a redundant answer, Marcus. Yes. The Dowager Duchess applied the handkerchief to her eye a second time. Aunt Augusta, who did not, on principle, weep in front of company, blew her nose into a square of cambric of her own, and announced that she had begun a cold that morning. We pretended to believe her. We did not set the date that afternoon. We set it 3 weeks later, at the end of October, for a Tuesday in the second week of December, at the village church at Cranfield, by special license and with no notice in the papers. The Dowager Duchess attended, in bottle green velvet. Aunt Augusta attended in her best slate grey. My father attended, with the curate at his elbow, and the boot boy carrying a borrowed prayer book, and he wept twice during the ceremony. Once when I came down the aisle on his arm, and once when Marcus bent to kiss me at the altar, and I, in front of the bishop's apparitor and a congregation of 14, kissed him back, with the small, clean certainty of a woman who had at last said yes to the question she should have been asked 7 years before. We honeymooned at Aldermere. The walled garden in December was bare. Marcus walked me through it, nevertheless, with his hand on the small of my back, and named me each empty bed and what would be in it by May. The brick wall held the last of the afternoon warmth against my shoulder. Somewhere beyond it, a robin scolded a cat. I told him that I should expect to be shown the garden again in May. He said he had been counting on it. We took our breakfast in the small east parlour, where the morning sun fell across a green and yellow rug, and we talked, every morning of that first month, of large things and of small. Of the boy in Walthamstow, who came up to Aldermere for a week at Easter with his mother, and who took a great liking to the kitchen cat, and a small, immediate liking to me. He stood beside my chair at breakfast and asked, in the grave way of small children, whether I was the lady who had married his godfather, and I told him I was, and he considered this for a moment and then asked whether I would mind, very much, if he called me Aunt Adelaide. I told him I should mind very much if he called me anything else. He nodded. He climbed back into his mother's lap. He has called me Aunt Adelaide ever since. Hannah Mowbray and I write to each other on the 1st of every month. The school in the back parlour of the Walthamstow cottage has grown into a small day school of 17 girls. Marcus and I pay the rent on the cottage next door, which the school now also occupies, and we have given her a small annuity that does not appear in any settlement book, but which she may draw on for any pupil she chooses to assist further. She is, by my own judgment, the cleverest woman I have ever corresponded with, and the most exact in her use of a comma. My father lives at Renfield, with the curate and the cook's husband, and a half-grown spaniel he won in a wager from the squire of the next parish. He dines at our table twice a year, and at Aunt Augusta's table 4 times. He has paid off the debt that he carried for 30 years. Marcus made him a loan at no interest in the first month of our marriage, and my father insisted on paying back every shilling within 5 years, which he did, the last payment falling on the 3rd anniversary of our wedding. He keeps in his desk, in a small lacquer box, the engagement ring I left on the pincushion at Renfield on the night of the rehearsal supper. He says it is to remind him not to be a fool again. I have not asked him whether he counts the night I left as the night he became a wiser man, or whether he counts it as the night his godson became his son in earnest. I think he counts it as birth. Aunt Augusta left us, peacefully, in the third winter of our marriage, in her own bed at Cranfield, with Mrs. Pine in the dressing room, and a fire in the hearth, and the small black and white cat she had refused to admit she loved, curled on the counterpane at her feet. She left me the abbey and the home farm. She left Marcus the chapel ruin, with a note that read, "You may rebuild it if you like, but I never could be bothered." He has not rebuilt it. He says he likes it as it is. I walk down to it on still afternoons, and sit on the broken stone of what used to be the altar, and think of her, and of the morning she stood on the porch in her shawl and her plait, and told me I had done the right thing. The Dowager Duchess writes to me every Sunday. She begins each letter, "My dear daughter," and ends each letter, "Your mother by marriage and by choice," which she has always insisted is a matter of importance to her and to me, and which it is. She has not, since the day she sat in the wing chair at Cranfield and told her son to stand up and not propose from a chair, set foot in a wing chair voluntarily. She prefers, she says, the sofa. I will tell you, last, of the cambric handkerchief. The cambric handkerchief I took from the seat pocket of the chaise on the night of the 20th of August, and which I did not give back, sits in the small lacquer box on the dressing table I share with my husband at Aldermere. It is folded in 4. It has been laundered, with great care, twice. It is, in every practical respect, an unremarkable square of cloth. On the night before our wedding, when I came down to dinner at Cranfield with the small dread that all brides feel even when they have no cause for it, Marcus put a small parcel beside my plate. I opened it. It contained a second handkerchief, of the same cambric, with the same plain hem, freshly laundered. The note inside read, in his hand, "For the next time you cry in a chaise, I do not propose to give you cause. I propose to be prepared. I keep them together. I have not yet cried in the second. I do not propose to. But I am, after 7 years, prepared." If you have listened this far, I should be very grateful if you would do 2 small things for the storyteller. Tell me, in a comment under this video, the moment in the tale that stayed with you. The rehearsal supper, the portrait gallery, the South Lodge, the morning room at Cranfield, the Dowager in her wing chair, or the second handkerchief, and I will read every one of them, as I always do, over tea on the morning after this story goes out. And if you found, in the long, quiet hours between the South Lodge and the noon at Cranfield, a place to set down something you had been carrying, for company, for the boy in Walthamstow, for an aunt of your own, for a question you wish had been asked of you sooner, subscribe to the channel, so that the next story, when it comes also to you. The fire will be lit. The chair will be by it. I will be glad to have you back. Until then, friend, sleep well, travel safe, and if anyone ever bends to your ear in a candlelit room and asks you, in earnest and in time, to choose the better road by morning, listen.